Everyone, thank you for being in this session. I'm going to keep this part pretty quick because we want to get to questions. So I'm Esther Shin, President of Urban Strategies. We're a national nonprofit that's based out of St. Louis, so a neighbor to you all. And we currently serve about 500,000 individuals across the country in 22 different cities in serving 31 neighborhoods. Our work primarily focuses on the non-bricks and mortar components of community transformation, so economic development, health, education, those critical areas that lead to the success of our mission. And our mission is that all families, all children and families will be stable and thriving. It's been a challenge during COVID. We've really had to pivot to stable, as I'm sure that a lot of you have had to as well. And thinking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation and how it shows up in our work. One, we have focused on 3 critical areas where I think that DEI most strongly shows up. And that's organization, then there's the work, and then there are partners. So in terms of the organization, that how we operationalize equity is we have a very clear equity declaration statement that operationalizes what equity means to us. So our staff represents they look like the communities in which we work. Our board looks like the communities in which we work. We use data to act on disparities and really hone in on strategies that are going to support our work and support moving families to thriving. When we talk about the work, it is that, again, that the strategies are actually focusing on serving the families and the individuals that are truly in need. And when we talk about with partners, that we are seeking out partners that align with our work as well. And that, quite honestly, are not afraid to have these kinds of tough conversations. That's not always easy, but those are the 3 sort of component areas of our work where we really see DEI. And then second, what we call person role system. And that is, there are individuals inside of your organization. How do we support those individuals to feel included? How do we hire in such a way that we are also hiring individuals with the same values as ours? So are we asking culturally competent questions? Are we seeking out individuals that really align with our values? And then enroll, giving our staff the tools to be able to have the tough equity conversations actually in the work, using data to drive equitable results on the ground, and to ensure that our system, that's the Urban Strategy system, is an organization that really champions equity and racial equity across all of our sites, and supporting families as we seek out partners that are doing the same thing. So that's us, really quick in a nutshell. And I'm going to pass it on now to, I believe, Andrew.
Thank you, Esther. And I want to thank Michael for inviting us here to have this conversation with you. And hopefully that's what this will be, as a conversation. I'd like to add just a little bit to Michael's introduction about us being funny and educational and informing. Hopefully we're also provocative for you, that this conversation will trigger some thoughts from you that maybe you hadn't had an opportunity to engage conversations about, things that you're curious about, things that are of our interest in this time. So hopefully we'll try to create that space for everybody, and we'll certainly invite everyone to participate in the conversation. So we'll try to be brief in these opening remarks and get to what's really important, is what's on your mind, and how we can be available to respond to some of those. So my name's Andrew Lofton. I'm with the Seattle Housing Authority, Executive Director there. The Seattle Housing Authority has about 8,000 public housing and affordable housing units that we own and manage. We also have over 10,000 vouchers that we also administer. We serve about 37,000 low-income people in the city of Seattle. We are the largest landlord in the city, and work very hard to make sure that our residents have access to safeties and housing. The topic that, if you want to raise the slides, Michael, the topic that we wanted to just kind of share with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sort of the challenges that we're with today, is really the kind of focus of a lot of conversations that agencies and folks have had over time, particularly since the spring with the George Floyd incident, and kind of making us confront some of the realities of what our residents and other persons of color have been going through for many, many years. And from a perspective of a housing provider, that's a critical piece for us, because many of that community lives in our housing. In Seattle, we serve a little over a third of the Black population in the city. So you can tell that that's a very serious and a very important aspect of life with the folks who we serve. They are the ones that are being impacted by the actions that are going on. And so we're challenged to how do we bring that voice, and how do we bring the issues around diversity, social justice, inequities to the table, so that our people that we serve get a chance to believe in their aspirations and have an opportunity to succeed in their aspirations in this climate and this culture. So we are challenged in that regard, because we are part of the larger community, and we're affected by the impacts and the effects of what happens in the larger community. One of the things that we have been doing since the unrest has happened here in Seattle is really reaching out to our residents in our community in a much more intentional way, and a much more frequent way, to find out what's going on with them, what are the issues that they have, and what are the things that we are doing that is either contributing or minimizing the challenges and stress that they have. And I think that's one of the keys that we've been kind of reminded of, is in this particular set of circumstances that we're in, this particular environment, connection with the residents and understanding what they are going through and what their needs are is just critical. And figuring out ways to do that much more frequently and much more effectively is the challenge that we've come across. So we've done a lot of reaching out to our residents through surveys, through focus groups, through property managers, to hear from them, to ask them the questions about what's happening with them and what's going on. And I think the essence of that is that communication, that for them to let us know what it is that they need. And then we can tailor our efforts and our programs toward them based upon that. And we set aside, or not set aside, but we set as the goal as we do that, to do that with through a race and social justice lens, to know that there has been disparities, that there has been racism, there has been discrimination, and that we have to acknowledge that and account for that in our response. So that's what I think, to kind of frame the discussion, is what I will close with. And Michael, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the slide, so I don't know what was going on with that, but I hope that we can just move on to, as I said, what's important to you all in the audience, and spend as much time as possible with questions and comments that you might have. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Stacy Spann.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Hoping that you all are well, and I just want to, before I get started, of course, thank Michael and Kansas NARO for having us. This is, I think that unfortunately, folks are growing tired of having some of this conversation, and I want to underscore, unfortunately, because this isn't just about a single group of people or two sets of people, but really the way forward for our country and the aspirations that an entire group of young people, young learners have, and quite frankly, much of what generations have fought for and believe ought to happen, right? And so with that, I want to point out that in Esther Shin and Andrew Lofton, you got on this panel two luminaries in the field, and Andrew, I mean, we're all sort of standing on his shoulders and those of the entire Seattle Housing Authority, and that those folks have been at the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for a long time. I mean, you're talking about decades, and I just want to point out that these two folks are two of the heroes in the space, and it's not just that they say the right things; it's that they're living them. They manage that way, and they're guiding entire communities. Esther, much of the country, and Andrew and progressive Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. And so I just want to express my appreciation for the two of them and all the work that they're doing. And I'm just beyond thrilled to be on another panel with them. So for us, my name is Stacy Spann. I'm the executive director at a mid-size housing authority in Montgomery County, Maryland, right outside of DC, our nation's capital. And in an area that is relatively affluent, but has also some of the most striking poverty that our nation knows, right? And so it's not lost on anybody. You see 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, that's where the White House is, and not that far from there are communities that have been disrupted, folks that have been pushed out, and the civil unrest that we have seen, the protest that we have seen, all directionally correct, if you ask me. Much of that, while it's at the doorstep of the White House, is taking place and starting in neighborhoods in DC that have been that have frankly been resource starved for a great many years. And so in its shadow is our little suburban county. And like Andrew, we've got a portfolio of around a little over 8,000 units. We have no technical public housing any longer. We've converted it, and we're highly acquisitive, but we also are aggressive developers. And so we're probably the most active developer in our county at this point. And we serve a full spectrum of customers, from market rate on down to folks who have, frankly, no income at all. And we serve those folks who are at the higher end of the market, so that we can actually make a place and sustain a place for those families who are resource starved, who are not by right born into the best school districts in the United States. And so in doing this work, we just do three little things. We try to get people housed, trying to keep them housed, and we're trying to help every family and every individual reach their fullest potential. And so those are, while those are three aspirational efforts, we measure every single thing we do in those three buckets. How many folks are we getting housed? How many people are we keeping housed? How many families and individuals are we helping reach their fullest potential? It's really simple to measure. And it's hard, as you all know, to do the work. And so I'd like to point out, in this era of civil unrest, and I would say just civil unrest. We are now having the difficult conversation because folks are not simply talking about equality. What they're talking about is real equity. And in order for that conversation to go on and advance, it means that somebody's got to give up something. And that's why there's so much animus. You ask anybody, it's what do you mean we have to give up something? Yes, 100%, right? Men have to give way to women leaders who are smarter, more capable, and in many cases, don't have just a mantle to fall forward into. And other folks have to give way to persons who have been historically denied access and opportunity. And in doing so, we find ourselves in an animated conversation around what equity means, what its place is in our society, and how it impacts every single person at every single rung of the economic and social ladder. So I'm really excited to hear some of the difficult questions. And with that, I want to thank you again. So Michael, your ball.
All right. Thank you very much for your introductions and the discussion here. So everyone, just so you know, don't be afraid to talk, to ask questions. This is our chance to really open up. Let me make sure. Andrew, did I completely skip over your PowerPoint, or is that?
Yeah, that's what he was saying.
Sorry about that.
You're on mute, Andrew.
All right, but
Not to worry.
So let's kind of get the conversation started with. A lot of people in the agencies in Kansas are on the smaller side. And a lot of times when it comes to issues like this, or even the pandemic, or anything that hits the news, that you get this mentality of, and I'm in the same way here in my small town, is, I've seen a lot of, that's for the bigger towns. Those are for other towns' issues. But in all reality, this is a human issue. So what would your reaction or motivation for those that are from more rural and smaller towns on being proactive and joining the conversation?
You're asking what our advice would be or how we would approach it ourselves. If is that what you're asking, Michael? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. This county that I work in, there are a number of smaller towns, and they're suburban. The county itself wants to kind of continue to hold up this progressive mantle, as if what we did in 1975 is enough for what we're living in 2020. And what I'd say is, it starts with the sort of very simplest things, and some of that is, what am I doing? Part of the conversation in terms of joining is, what are we doing here to really support an equity agenda? And what does that actually look like, even in our small town? And I think small, medium-sized, large, everyone can actually ask those questions, answer them, and find not only some truth, but some areas of improvement. And I think that's a way to start. And I know that Esther and Andrew have some really good stuff, so I'll shut up.
So, we work with housing authorities of various sizes. And as you said, Michael, these issues are not unique to large cities. And I think in some ways, large cities think that they've already figured it out, at least in some places. And racial equity has gotten a lot of attention, as it should, right? With the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and a lot of just real struggles around race. And there are also other conversations around equity as well. Stacy brought up gender. So, even in these communities that may be more homogenous, there are always going to be equity conversations that need and should be had, whether it be around gender. Where are you recruiting your staff from? Are they only from the major educational institutions in your state, or are you also reaching out to some of the smaller or the historic Black colleges and universities? Is there pay equity inside your organization? Are you moving families towards equitable pay? So not just inside the organization, but in terms of how you're supporting your consumer. Are you moving them towards equitable pay as well? So when we talk about equity, there are a lot of strands to it.
Thank you. Andrew?
I don't have much to add to Stacy and Esther's description. I will say that I will reiterate, Michael, your comment about this being a human issue, not a race issue. And I think we get sometimes distracted because of the emphasis that is placed, and I think rightly so, on the challenges around race. But that also distracts from or overshadows sort of some fundamental issues that are at play around equity and diversity and inclusion. And those housing authorities, those small housing authorities, rural housing authorities, the people that you serve have one thing in common with everyone, is that they have very little income, and they're challenged of how to survive on that income. That's true across the board, in large cities, small cities, rural areas, whatever. And those challenges are different than middle-class folks have challenges of, or higher income folks have challenges of. So there are very similar issues that folks as we're going through this unrest, that are being uncovered, that the impetus was race, because it's so stark in how it is applied and how it affects individual households. But some of the underlying problems are shared, regardless of race. And the question that folks are trying to bring up is, let's get at that, those underlying problems. We can see them and we can show you them through the race lens because they're so blatant. But if you then apply that to the rest of the community, you'll see that many other folks are subject to those same issues. And that's why you're right, Michael, it's not simply a race issue. For us to all be secure, we've got to address that for everyone.
Thank you so much. This next question kind of goes along those same lines, but I've talked to a lot of people that really believe that the media has just blown up and created a new issue, and it's not really as bad as it seems. What would you say? Sorry, the office manager, that's our Roxy, the boss's dog, is letting me know she wants a treat. But anyways, what would you say to those who don't think that this is truly a real issue?
Can I just point out real quick, Megan actually put a question in the chat box as well. But I do have something to say about the question itself. I mean, look, I mean, I think we all can throw rocks at the media and their handling of certain matters. But whether or not disparities exist and unjust treatment of citizenry is occurring, it's kind of beyond dispute. The media aren't the folks capturing this stuff on video, right? We're talking about normal citizens, and incidentally, we're talking about a range of issues, and there are a range of persons who are enduring that. You know, all races, all genders, all sexual preferences. And what I'd say is first, I mean, any of that injustice is an affront to justice, any of it. All right. And if you can sort of justify, well, this person's a criminal, or well, that person had a record, doesn't matter. At the point at which many of these assaults are occurring, no one actually knows anything about the other person except the things that are most obvious around either why they're in a place doing a thing or what the person looks like. So sure, the media is out to do what it does, whatever that is, wherever we are. But the fact of the matter is these instances are being caught by everyday citizens. And what we see is the very folks who are supposed to enforce laws to help keep communities safe are abusing those privileges and subjecting persons to just inhumane acts and incredible violence.
So, Michael, I would respond to that question and respond to Megan's question as well, because I think that my response is connected and tied to one another. You know, when you watch the news, I mean, as a person, not in role, right? As a person, sometimes when I watch the news, some of the stuff just seems so ridiculous, right? Like some of the things that people say and do, they didn't show up. You know, they weren't born being ridiculous, right? Our perceptions, our mental models and biases are all based on lived in experiences, right? And so like Megan, in terms of staff or colleagues, coworkers, or just people that you know, these values and beliefs are coming from somewhere, right? Like when I showed up on this call today, my 10-year-old self showed up. Esther of yesterday showed up, right? We don't leave our baggage and our experiences behind, both good and bad. And so when countering some of these conversations, you really have to, one, there has to be the development of the self-work, right? So what sort of trauma did your coworker endure, like, right, go through as a kid or as an adult that brought about these mental models and these biases, right? And then giving room for and giving grace to staff who might actually be curious and don't know how to voice some of their criticisms or concerns in a constructive manner. And so providing that opportunity so that those conversations can happen. You know, an example that I often give, I think Stacy's familiar with this example, he's probably heard this before, but an example I often give in terms of the self-work and the person role system work that needs to take place is that, you know, when I was 17 years old growing up in suburban St. Louis, I had a classmate that called me a chink every day for my entire senior year. Right. And now more than 30 years later, I still, when I talk about it, have feelings. And that was over 30 years ago. So you can imagine all of your colleagues and your acquaintances have similar kinds of experiences to varying degrees of trauma. And these influence you, right? This young man that called me a chink every day went on to play for a Big Ten university. I love college basketball. I will never root for this team. and now as an adult, we can joke about it, right? That I will never root for this school. But in reality, what happens if I get a resume from someone who went to this school, right? Being self-aware enough to know that your traumas, because there is no data that shows that everyone that went to this university is racist, right? Or has these feelings. So, I would recommend, provide showing a lot of grace for people's lived in experiences. You don't know what trauma people have. 93% of the organization that I lead are people of color. People of color have a lot of mental models about each other, right? That you're also having to dispel, right? So giving grace, giving opportunities to build that self-awareness and do that self-work, I think is really important. And use data, because data, is pretty clear.
Michael, in terms of the first part of the question, and I will also speak a little bit on Megan's question that's in the chat room. That's a difficult proposition for folks who are under the belief that this is overblown or is a media created event. Because the difference that we have today is that we have some evidence that this is going on through the videos that are coming to light. And prior to that, all we had was folks complaining that there had been brutality or there had been some action against them. Now there's actual evidence that you can see that, yeah, that did happen. So I think if anything, it's not overblown, it's understated, that this has been going on for quite some time. And what we're seeing now is some opportunities to see the actual events occur. And when you see it, it's hard to believe. It is hard to watch and think that that is actually another human being doing this to someone. And so your natural tendency is to shy away and say that's just a isolated incident, or that's not quite as bad as it looks. You start to rationalize things. But as Esther just indicated, looking at the data, looking at the facts that this is actually occurring repeatedly over time to a population that's been disparately treated over the years. Those are just difficult conversations to have with folks who believe that this is overblown. And they, in some cases, apparently are refusing to accept that the evidence that's being demonstrated throughout the country. But you have to continue to have those conversations and continue to point out the facts that this is actually occurring. And Megan, in your question about changing the culture, that's one of the most difficult things to do. You have to start with a good intention. You have to start with folks wanting to be a part of the conversation and wanting to make the change. And those are hard conversations. Those are hard discussions to have with people to change a culture. And I don't want to sugarcoat that, because the emotions that are initiated and as Esther just described, what we bring to the experience from our own experiences is going to be hard to overcome. And they're just hard conversations, but they're conversations that have to be had, and they have to be had truthfully. They have to be laid out, and there's pain in that. But it is something that if they're going to be authentic, that they've got to get to the core of those issues and surface those feelings and trying to go deeper into what's driving them and how they are manifest themselves in the everyday work.
Hey, can I actually jump in a little bit on Megan's question? Because Megan, I'm appreciative that you added the clarification, but as I read the initial question, I actually made no assumption that it was necessarily about purely race or culture. When differences to me was sort of the hallmark. And when we're talking about culture change, Andrew is absolutely right. It's difficult, but it does take some catalyst, and that catalyst can simply be a goal of mutual respect. It often starts with some small experience or some small challenge, and I don't mean necessarily confrontational. So I'll rephrase, some small objective, and then grows into something that is much more beneficial, and it is around a universal expectation of respect that should be given and respect that ought to be received. And there's some because of our lived experience, because we're humans, and really the whole reason this whole thing is messed up is because we're human. It is sometimes about how the environment is landing on those folks who are within it, and then the customers who are served by it. And it's been 8+ years here at this agency for me, and I can tell you the way that our lobbies were set up to receive customers, and our excitement about, or lack of excitement about, assisting customers was one of the things that hit me square on the nose when I walked in the door. And what I can tell you is, for whatever reason, I mean, there's an entrance where I park. I could go through that entrance, but routinely, at least once a quarter, I just misplace my badge or leave it in my office, and I'm forced to walk through the front door. That's probably the universe telling me that I need to walk through the front door all the time and understand how customers are being received and welcomed into what is supposed to be a safe space, where folks have to be vulnerable so that we can help them. And so I get where you're going with the question, but it really, I mean, it takes a long time. It's difficult, and there are things that I'm still working on with partners. So the thing is, and Andrew pointed this out, folks have to be willing to partner with you in that effort. In your agency, in your system, in their role, they've got to be willing to partner with you. And then, unfortunately, everybody ain't gonna make it. Everybody is not willing to come along, and so changes have to be made. But I'll be honest. I mean, there are folks here who are they're repeating what was done to them, and they've been here for much longer than I have. And so, their belief system, it has been now changed such that they think that's actually the way to bring along staff, right? To bring along partners in the effort to, what we're really doing is convening in an effort to help families and individuals be their best selves. That's what the job is. And so the reminder for that I give to my team pretty regularly is, but for the challenges that these families are having, some of us would not be able to feed our families. How about that? And so if that's not worth honoring, if that's not worth meeting people where they are with sincerity and equal vulnerability and a willingness to, set aside our own issues, then I'm not sure what is. But I also invite those same people to find somewhere else to work if they can be willing to do that.
Michael, I just want to chime in, just add one piece to reiterate something that Stacy raised that is kind of the hallmark of this, and for Megan as well, and the challenge that you are raising, that it starts with respect. And you have to respect your colleagues, you have to respect the people that you serve, you have to respect yourself. In our onboarding of all of our new employees at Seattle Housing Authority, I get a chance to meet them all when they first start. And I tell them about the history of the organization and our goals, our mission statement. But I leave them with the one thing that I expect of everyone is that they respect the people that they serve, they respect each other, and they respect the organization. And if it doesn't include that, if you don't start there, it is a hard hill to climb to get to the point where you're changing the culture.
I agree, and thank y'all so much. Those are some great responses, and kind of going with that same flow of the discussion. Looking at, I had the gallery view open, so I'm looking at in our audience we have those that are executive directors, leadership, and other titles, as well as those who may not be. For any of them, though, what would you say are realistic first steps to this? I mean, this is a big subject that has many facets to it, but what's a realistic first step to start making a change?
That's a big question, right? And the reality of it is when you talk about a race and equity journey, it never ends, right? Even for organizations that have made great strides, it's a never-ending journey. Where to start? I think that's a question to put back to you all. It is, there are so many places that you could potentially start at. Is it in your hiring practices? Do you need to create a value statement to demonstrate what this means? How do you operationalize equity inside of your organization? Is it in, is your board representative? Is your staff, your, not just your staff, but your leadership? Is it, where you are seeing people of color? Is it only in entry level jobs and not at the executive level? Is it in how you measure your success, right? And how you're measuring your performance? Is that equitable as well? I think it's really important, whether it be your leadership team or whomever inside the organization that needs to answer those questions. And it's also really important to get feedback from staff that if you want your team to buy into whatever cultural shifts take place inside of your organization, you have to get buy-in from your staff. They have to be able to see that any recommendations or changes that they wanted to see, that they see it in whatever changes take place. I will give you an example. With this year, there was a lot of pressure to give Juneteenth off for staff. And that makes a lot of sense when there's an organization like 93% people of color. And yet it felt really performative to suddenly in this year to give Juneteenth off. So rather than doing that, instead we gave an extra extended period of time over Memorial Day, over Labor Day, to recognize everyone's hard work. And then we have a committee inside of the organization called the Culture Club, and they were tasked for making the decision of whether or not Juneteenth is a holiday we take off permanently rather than something in 2020 because we were reacting to something, right? So if we're truly going to make this a cultural shift, that I gave the work back to the team, because again, when we a recurring theme is not everyone inside Urban Strategies is African American. So I know that there were groups that might have felt left out, and so in being truly inclusive, gave the work back to the staff to make that proposal.
Can I just say, so everyone loves the holiday, but the finer point that Esther is making is, how do you give equanimity in recognition of all of the sort of culturally relevant potential holidays, right? And how are we to weigh one against the other? And so giving the work back to the team and having them make the recommendation. First, I should, applaud that. That's awesome.
As Esther said, it's a huge question, Michael, and I think Esther did a great job of answering it. It's a hard question as well because every organization is different, and every organization is going to be at a different level, different stage. Some are going to be much more ready to take this on than others. And so there are different strategies based upon where your organization might be and how large your organization is. At SHA, we're a pretty large group, and so we have a staff group that's focused on race and social justice issues for the department. So we've asked them to take on that work and to be advisors and counsels to the rest of the organization around all of our policies and protocols and et cetera. But we were ready to do that. Everybody's not ready to get there at some point. I think the first step, though, is to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, that this is not going to be perfect, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this sort of circumstance. Starting the work is the most important piece of this, however you do that. If it's a one-on-one conversation with a colleague, based upon your where you are in the organization, sometimes that's easier. An executive director certainly has a lot more leeway of how to push this forward than an entry-level staff person. But an entry-level staff person can raise issues, can say, I have this question, or I have this concern, or I'd like to pursue something, and just raise it, get it on the table for conversation, and hopefully that you'll get some folks that will join you in that quest for addressing the issues themselves. But I think if you recognize that it's not going to be perfect, but so take away some of the risk and the fear of this is going to be a problem. Know that it's going to be a problem, but try to do the best you can to focus on what the issues are, and the rest will start to evolve. And Esther described a pretty advanced level of an organization who's into this, and what they've been able to do, and that will hopefully be something that everybody can aspire to.
I'd like to add also that first of all, that what Andrew said is perfect. It really depends on where the organization itself is in its place, right? And that doesn't mean that just because you have a large organization that's been around for decades, that it ought to be more advanced than in this practices than an organization that is, essentially been around for a year and is a startup. This is not a race against individual organizations, but rather where you and your team are. And there's also the small matter of how the externalities in your home environment are landing on your organization and your team. But as he pointed out, it's not easy. You're going to make mistakes, but wherever you are in the organization's life cycle, it is equally important to actually have authentic vulnerability in leadership. And so he's right, you're gonna make a ton of mistakes. But it could be that giving the work back to the team isn't quite the thing to do because they're not ready yet. Or you don't have the team you need to make that happen. It could be that the locality in which you're working is not quite ready for that super advanced state of equity zen that Esther's shop is in, right? And in Esther's case, given where they work all across the country, each one of those jurisdictions is very different from the next. And so, it might be looking at your staff and figuring out if there has actually pay equity to start, right? recognizing that every family that you're serving is not exactly the same, and you need to meet them where they are. It starts in those very those places of the most respect for customers, and then squaring with your mission. So I'd have to agree, but I think vulnerability is one of those traits, and consistency around it, and having the honest conversation and telling folks where, that this is something that really should be a priority, and here's why. And then I'll say, in this COVID-19 environment where we're not all working in the same offices and you can't just walk down the hall, whatever progress you've made on this front is also the fodder that holds together your agency, right? It's the strength of your relationships. And so you've got to actually figure out a way to pick it up in that place, even if that's remote. And, as an example, I have now, we can't have general staff meetings with the whole team there. And so I've enhanced the meeting times with folks that I ordinarily wouldn't see, but I want to give people an opportunity to ask whatever difficult questions, however they're going to ask them, and try to meet them there. Right now, largely, it's panic and concern about whether or not they're going to have a job next week. Right, and so that's where we are right now. If I can't take their temperature down on that item, then forget about our customers being served. It's never going to happen. Right, and so job one right now is, okay, how do we stabilize? How do I, make sure folks understand that, our intent is to make sure this place continues to run well, and they're going to get paychecks every other week. Right now, how do I do that while at the same time communicating the urgency around continuing to do their work? Tricky. And I can tell you, we've tried some stuff, and some of it has failed miserably. And we tried some other stuff, and it's kind of worked out with a segment, and then we try and build from there. So.
Thank you. Now, I could probably ask questions all day because I think this is an important discussion to have, but I want to give our audience a chance to either ask a question, or if you've gone through a scenario in the last few months and you would like opinions from our panel, this is the time. These are some of the great discussions that we need to be having. So don't be shy. Step up and ask or talk, and let's get this ball rolling.
Or we could just have a party.
Well, we're always down for a good time. We're missing the hospitality room around here. But
in this, Michael, you have to take the hospitality room with you everywhere you go. Right? It's in my pocket right now.
Right.
Just letting you know, the hospitality room is wherever you are. That's where the hospitality room is. Right, Megan.
Can't really like that. So I'm going to ask the one of the hard questions. So, a lot of times when we're wanting to make these discussions, we make sure to choose someone that kind of goes with it. Whether it's, do we have to have someone of color that gives the topic, or which sex do we have to give the topic? How would you encourage those who, I guess, or my profile, a white male, how would you encourage them to be just as active as those that you would probably put on the poster of this topic?
Yeah, is there a poster in 2020? I mean, it really, look, equity is one of those things. I mean, so where do you start in it, right? Here, for me, it's what do you feel like you have to lose in this whole discussion, and the implementation of a real equity agenda? Because if we're super honest, That's the part where it's most disconcerting for folks, right? You mean to tell me I've got to give something up? You know, why can't these folks just forget about this thing? I mean, why can't you just get over it? And as you know, both Esther and Andrew pointed out, this is part of our lived experience, but some of the, you know, sort of genetic DNA that is transferred from our family experience into our person. So
I think it's important that we all hold accountability for this, right? While I'm a person of color, I have no idea what it's like to be a Black woman in this country, right? I don't know what it's like to be Stacy and Andrew. So I can't expect them to hold the water alone and get the outcome that we all want to see achieved, right? So there is a place for everyone in this conversation, and we have to take accountability for it, and we have to own it.
And I'll just add, Michael, I couldn't say any better than what Esther and Stacy have said, but I will just add that the word that Stacy used in earlier conversation, authenticity. So as you enter this work, authentic caring and authentic efforts around it have to be at the forefront. If it's seen as shallow or insincere, it will do more damage than anything else. But while I can't speak on behalf of a white person, I'm not that. I haven't had that experience. I do have a lot of interactions with white colleagues who are as interested and serious about this as I am. And what comes across there is the sincerity and authenticity, and that I know we can work together. So that, I think, was the one characteristic that you bring to this work that is important.
Yeah, I think that Andrew is absolutely correct. This can't be about compliance, right? A box that you check. So when we talk about organizational culture change, it's tough. It's tough.
Thank you, Esther. That's actually a comment I was thinking of making earlier was, you know, a lot of times, you know, an issue's up and whoever's the head person of it will stick out a statement just for PR's sake, but you don't really see change. You just saw a reaction. And sorry, it's kind of hard to form in the words. It really is about authenticity. That's the subject of all this, is just being true and open. I think a lot of times people are afraid to have the conversations of this and that because they're trying to be tolerant, but at the same time not step on toes. And, you know, I really don't want to start drama or, you know, stuff like that. It's, you know, it's such a hot topic that a lot of people tend to avoid it all completely just so that they don't have issues. So I want to thank you so much for just your openness and the fact that you shared with us. We have a few more minutes, but I kind of want to give each of y'all a chance to give a closing comment of your heart or the message you want to give, that just kind of for us to wrap up this conference, this session, and us to take out with us. What is your word of light for us?
I'll start. And well, first of all, respond to Tina's comment in the chat, is that you're absolutely right, Tina. Sometimes you have to agree to disagree. I think that hopefully that can be done respectfully and not judgmentally. And being consistent and true to your values in those interactions is what will carry the day, in my experience. You're absolutely right. There are going to be those challenging conversations, those challenging interactions where agreement cannot be reached, and you just have to be agree to disagree, but do it in a way that is respectful and is true to your values. So in closing, I just want to again thank you, Michael, for the opportunity and the invitation. We appreciate it. Happy to have engaged in this with my colleagues here. It's always nice to be on the same stage as Esther and Stacy. What I will leave you with is something that has been alluded to and mentioned about this work. It has a lot to do with who's around you, who you have brought into your sphere at your organizations, of shared values, of shared objectives around the work that you're doing and the people that you're serving. That is monumental in getting the work initiated and sustained. And what we haven't talked about, that I will, last comment I will make is that last word I use is sustained. This isn't a one-time meeting. This isn't a training that you went to or a conference that you went to and then you go back in business as usual. This is an everyday, from here on out effort to bring equity and diversity into your community, into your organization. And it doesn't stop. So be prepared for that for the long haul. You will have support from colleagues who are in this work as well.
Esther, did you want to?
Sure. So my closing comments are, I'll just reiterate, as we've said, this is hard work. You know, there are experts, but in reality, this, as I said, it's a journey, and it's iterative, I think. You learn a lot along the way. And, you know, as leaders inside of our respective organizations, I know that it's a balancing act. There are certain behaviors you want to change, but at the same time, in order for them to change, you have to show some grace, because people are coming from all different kinds of experiences that are really influencing their worldviews. And so, you know, we're going to make mistakes. And so when your staff do, that's when the grace is really important. And then, you know, it is about the conversation. It's about starting. And so for me, you know, I always say that in this fight, I consider myself a co-conspirator, and hope that that you all are as well. So thank you.
That's well said. And I'll just end with, I think it, as we pointed out, it starts, but also ends with respect. And if we're focused on our shared values, then ultimately we're able to rally, to work together, and then continue as we're continuing to meet mission as we're vigilant and gracious. So yeah, with that, I would just really want to thank my co-panelists, and Michael, thank you, and Candace Naro.